Mom moved willingly to the Protestant home and had a pool for the she and I loved. Even though she was Jewish, we didn't think the name or the mostly Christian population would be a problem for her. She had lived and worked with people from diverse backgrounds. Mom always fit in. Also, this assisted living facility was just blocks away from the government compound where she had been employed for 25 years. Perhaps she'd run into some of the old gang from work. She seemed to make a good adjustment, and within a month or two, she said, "Sell my house. I don't want to worry about it anymore." Her home of 52 years had been her pride and joy. She and Dad savored every stage of its construction back in 1950. It was filled with the remains of everything that meant anything to her. Now it seemed to be just another burden to leave behind, a remnant from a fading life. I did as I was told and contracted with the realtor she'd suggested. The Protestant home turned out to be the wrong choice. She hated the food, stopped eating, and had nothing to do and no one she wanted to see. She complained, "I feel like I'm in jail." Of course, she was isolating herself, most of the time, embarrassed about the state of her mind. To help her feel less closed in, I suggested a trip to the art museum. I'd pick her up and we'd spend the day together, just like we used to. I put it off for a few days, favoring her doctoring schedule and my other responsibilities. She said, "You promise me all these great things, and then you don't follow through." "I'm trying as hard as I can," I said. Her comments tortured me because I was spending most of my time trying to make things great for her. Before her illness, disappointment in me was not something she would ever express, even if I deserved it. She didn't want to hurt me, so she didn't mention it. It wasn't in her makeup to reproach me. She used her own inner resources to get over disappointments and move on. She could make herself happy by chewing gum and turning on the radio. Now it seemed her emotional resources had totally dried up. She wanted to die, but her whole life had been shaped by a never say die attitude. She was a child of immigrants who picked themselves up, dusted themselves off, and were productive and upbeat for every long, hard day that God gave them. So what was this thing that first gnawed at her and then whacked her over the head, turning my brains to molasses, as she repeated to doctors, friends, and family? Worry lined her face. Anxiety stripped her of pleasure. Desperate to save herself, she stayed up all night doing jumbles to exercise her mind and avoid the nightmares she couldn't separate from upon awakening. She made lists on the backs of envelopes, cancel credit cards, cell phone, get Tracy's name on bank accounts. She wanted to cancel everything, get rid of things, so she wouldn't worry about them. She thought the less she had, the less she'd lose. She began hiding from friends and family, not answering her phone. When she could pull herself together to go out, she'd ask her confidants at the senior center, "Do you ever get depressed? Do you ever cry first thing in the morning and have a hard time leaving your bedroom?" She never had, never ever, one day of her life where she didn't just hop to it. So what the hell was happening now? Now, her body was bent over. Her head oscillated back and forth. When she stood, her quivering fists were balled in anger, and her face wore a permanent scowl. Her walk became as crooked as her expression. When I did take her to the art museum, she complained the whole way there. "How will I get around? It's too much trouble. You take on too much. I can't understand anything anymore anyway. Your driving makes me crazy. There's nowhere to park. How will I walk the steps?" She'd never been a complainer. Now every activity provoked deep anxiety. Despite her discomfort, I knew she still wanted to try. She climbed the steps and we borrowed a wheelchair. We saw the Degas exhibit. She listened to the lecture, although she said she could hardly hear it through the earphones. But after the lecture, we went to the museum cafeteria for coffee and chocolate chip cookies. When finished, she stood erect, bussed our table, wiped it clean with her napkin, and insisted on pushing the wheelchair. "I don't think I really need this." She waved at the air in front of her, as if to push away the curtain of the last 6 months. We perused the rest of the Impressionist paintings. Mom began to reminisce. Such beauty and grace. I missed the ballet and the orchestra. Remember the exceptional films we saw here? And those great dinners afterwards. You know, this is where Daddy and I shared our first kiss, right here on the steps of the Art Museum, back in 1946. I remember the story, Mom, and the exceptional film society, and those great meals we had after the movies. You know, we can still go to the orchestra. I'll get tickets, and let's go out for dinner tonight. I needed this reprieve. For dinner, we stopped at a Chinese restaurant. As she dumped fried noodles in duck sauce, she chatted on about what a great time we'd had and how lucky we were as Philadelphians to have such a great treasure in our own backyard as the Philadelphia Museum of Art. She ate her shrimp and lobster sauce like she hadn't eaten in weeks, because she hadn't. Finally, I took her back to her room at the Protestant home. Not to my house, because I had somewhere to go that night, and the bed was too high, and she might roll off, and I didn't have a sitter, and so many other reasons. So she went to her new home, where she slumped in her chair and forgot about every great thing that had happened that day. On the following afternoon, I stopped by her room and found her still in bed. "Get the hell out of here, let me die," was her greeting. I found her hand under the covers and held it. "Ouch, God damn it, Mom, you bit me." I began to cry. "Just put me somewhere," she said. "Yeah, Mom, if only I knew where." Now my head was in my own trembling hands. I began living in a world of if-onlys. Night and day, my mind never stopped thinking up grand solutions to a problem that just didn't have one. If only I'd taken her home with me that evening after the museum. If only I could take her home to her house, where now the azaleas were in bloom and the roses were budding. Perfect to attract a buyer, said the realtor. If only I could leave her at the Art Museum in assisted living, admiring ballerinas and lingering by Monet's garden pond. She would be constantly inspired and happy, and we could go back to life as usual. If only I could look ahead with cockeyed optimism. But I was growing less green.